The bridge of the warship Undying Light was on fire. Admiral Torvald gripped the edge of his command console as another explosion shook the ship from bow to stern. The lights flickered. Sparks rained down from the ceiling. Around him, his crew screamed orders at each other in voices filled with fear. On the main view screen, he could see the rest of his fleet, what was left of it breaking apart like toys in the hands of an angry child. 300 ships. He had started this battle with 300 ships. Now, barely 2 hours into the fight, he had less than 90. The Velhari were everywhere. Their dark, angular warships moved through the void like a swarm of insects, perfectly coordinated, perfectly ruthless. They fired in patterns so precise that it almost looked like a dance. Every shot found its target. Every formation was flawless. That was how the Velhari fought. They were connected mind to mind, ship to ship, through a shared signal that let them think and move as one single creature. Fighting them was like fighting a living storm. You could not outthink something that had a million brains working together. Torvald had been fighting this war for 26 years. He had watched better admirals than himself die in battles just like this one. He had buried friends. He had lost entire fleets. And still, the Velhari kept coming, kept pushing, kept winning. "Admiral," his second officer shouted, "the starborn fury is gone. The pale dawn is venting atmosphere on all decks. We need to retreat." Torvald closed his 4 eyes slowly. Retreat. That word had become the most common word in the Concordance military. Retreat, regroup, retreat again. They had been retreating for 42 years now. The Crucible War, that was what the historians called it. 42 years of blood and fire between the Sithal Concordance and the Velhari Dominion. 42 years of the galaxy tearing itself apart. "Signal all remaining ships," Torvald said quietly. "Fall back to the Keth relay point." He did not watch as his fleet turned and ran. He had seen it too many times before. 3 days later, Admiral Torvald stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Council on the station called Haven Point. It was one of the last truly safe places in Concordance space. The hall was enormous, built to hold representatives from over 40 species, but many of those seats were empty now. Some species had been conquered. Some had fled to the far edges of the galaxy. Some had simply stopped answering calls. The council elder, a tall and ancient Sithal named Prelate Drassen, stood at the center of the chamber. His skin was pale gray, and his long robes hung off his thin frame like cloth draped over bone. He looked tired. Everyone looked tired. "The situation is clear," Drassen said, his voice echoing through the hall. "We have lost the outer territories. We have lost the Midrim colonies. Our fleet strength is at 19% of what it was at the start of the war. Military projections give us 18 months, perhaps less, before the Velhari reach our core worlds." Silence filled the room. It was the silence of people who had run out of hope. A delegate from the Morith species, small, gray-skinned beings known for their intelligence, raised a trembling hand. "There is one option we have not tried." Drassen looked at him. "Speak." "The humans." The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. Some delegates shifted uncomfortably. Others shook their heads. Torvald watched from his seat and said nothing. He had thought about this himself many times. Humanity, the strange young species from a small blue planet orbiting an unremarkable star. They had been discovered 80 years ago, a blink of an eye in galactic terms. When the Concordance first made contact with them, most species had dismissed them. They were too young, too small, too primitive. They had only just learned to travel between stars. They were given observer status in the Council, allowed to watch, allowed to trade, but not allowed to vote or hold real power. And then the war began. The Concordance had asked politely at first, then desperately for humanity to join the fight. Every time, the human ambassador had given the same answer, a calm, measured, almost frustrating answer. Humanity does not enter conflicts it has not studied. That was it. No anger, no passion, just patience, always patience. Many in the council had grown to resent the humans for it. How could they sit there, safe in their little corner of the galaxy, while trillions suffered and died? What kind of species watched a war burn for 4 decades and did nothing? The humans have refused us before, Drassen said carefully, many times. Then we ask again, the Morith delegate replied. We have no pride left to lose. The vote was held. It was not unanimous. Some delegates would rather die than beg, but it passed. A formal plea for military assistance would be sent to the Terran Confederacy, the governing body of humanity, based on their homeworld of Earth. Torvon voted yes. He did not expect it to matter. The message traveled across the galaxy at the speed of light, bouncing through relay stations and quantum communication nodes, until it reached a small, well-guarded office on the 214th floor of a building in a city called Geneva. Director Alara Voss read the message twice. She was a woman of 53 years, with short silver hair, sharp brown eyes, and the kind of calm expression that made it impossible to know what she was thinking. She had served as humanity's chief diplomatic representative to the galaxy for 11 years. Before that, she had been an intelligence officer. Before that, a soldier. Very few people in the galaxy knew any of this. She set the message down on her desk and looked out the window. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. It was beautiful. Earth was always beautiful. That was the thing about humans. They had grown up on a world that was constantly trying to kill them. Earthquakes, floods, volcanoes, ice ages, plagues. And through all of it, they had survived. Not because they were the strongest or the fastest, but because they were patient, because they watched, because they learned. And when the time was right, they acted. Her assistant, a young man named Cole, stepped into the office. Director, the council's message. I read it. What should I tell them? Voss turned from the window. For the first time in a very long while, there was something in her eyes that Cole had never seen before. It was not excitement. It was not anger. It was certainty. Tell General Wren to open the Deepwell files, she said. All of them. Cole blinked. All of them, Director, that would mean. I know what it means. She paused and allowed herself the smallest of smiles. 42 years, I think we have studied enough. She picked up her secure communicator and opened a channel that had not been used in decades. A channel that connected directly to the most secret military installation humanity had ever built. Somewhere in the cold darkness between stars, buried inside a rogue planet drifting through empty space, lights began to turn on. Consoles that had been sleeping for years hummed to life. Officers who had trained their entire careers for a single order finally received it. The message was short, just 2 words. Begin Horizon. And with that, humanity stopped watching. General Marcus Wren had not slept in 31 hours, and he did not plan to sleep for another 31 more. He stood at the center of the war room inside Deepwell, humanity's most closely guarded secret. The station was enormous, carved into the iron core of a rogue planet that drifted through the empty space between star systems. No star lit this place. No trade route passed near it. It existed on no map, in no database, in no record that any alien species could ever find. As far as the galaxy was concerned, Deepwell did not exist. But it was very, very real. The war room alone was the size of a stadium. Holographic displays filled the air above the central table, showing star maps, fleet positions, communication intercepts, and intelligence reports gathered over 4 decades. Hundreds of officers sat at stations around the room, their faces lit blue by their screens. The air was thick with tension and focus. Every person in this room had trained for years for this exact moment. Many of them had been born after the Crucible War started. They had grown up knowing that one day they would be called upon to end it. That day had arrived. Wren looked around the room. He was a tall man, broad in the shoulders, with a shaved head and deep-set gray eyes that gave nothing away. He was 60 years old, but he moved with the energy of a man half that age. He had spent 34 years in the Terran military, rising through the ranks not because of ambition, but because of a simple truth. Marcus Wren was the most dangerous strategic mind humanity had ever produced, and humanity had produced some very dangerous minds. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, and the room fell silent instantly. "Director Voss has authorized Operation Horizon Fall, full deployment, no restrictions." A wave of something passed through the room. It was not fear. It was not excitement. It was the quiet, focused energy of a machine that had just been switched on. "Let me remind you what we are about to do," Wren continued. He pressed a command on the table and the holographic display shifted to show the full map of the galaxy. Red zones marked Velhari-controlled space. It covered nearly a third of the known galaxy. Blue zones marked what was left of the Concordance. And there, in a small corner of one spiral arm, was a tiny green dot. Earth. Humanity. For 42 years, the galaxy has looked at us and seen a small, quiet species that refused to fight. They thought we were afraid. They thought we were weak. Some of them thought we simply did not care. He paused. They were wrong about all of it. He changed the display again. Now it showed something that no alien had ever seen, the true scale of what humanity had built in secret. It had started 80 years ago, the moment humanity made first contact with the Concordance. While diplomats smiled and exchanged gifts, a different group of humans had begun a very different kind of work. Scientists, engineers, intelligence officers, and military planners, the best minds on Earth, had been quietly pulled into a program called Project Looking Glass. Their mission was simple: learn everything. Every piece of alien technology that humanity could buy, borrow, or quietly steal was brought back to hidden laboratories across the solar system. FTL drives were taken apart molecule by molecule and rebuilt. Shield generators were studied until human engineers understood them better than the species that had invented them. Weapon systems were reverse engineered and then improved using principles that no other species had ever considered. Because humans thought differently, the galaxy's older species had been using the same basic technologies for thousands of years. They had perfected them, yes, but they had stopped innovating. They saw their technology the way a person sees a hammer, a tool that works, so why change it? Humans did not think that way. Humans looked at a hammer and thought, what if it could also be a drill, a saw, and a key? In 42 years, humanity had not just caught up to the galaxy. They had surpassed it. Wren showed them the evidence. First, the ships. The Terran Confederate Navy had built 1,200 warships in secret shipyards hidden inside asteroids and gas clouds across deep space. Each ship was a generation ahead of anything flying in the galaxy. Their hulls were made of adaptive alloys that could redistribute energy from impacts. Their weapons systems could switch between kinetic, energy, and electromagnetic payloads in seconds. Their engines were faster, their shields were stronger, and every single system on every single ship was connected through something humanity called the quantum mesh. The quantum mesh was perhaps humanity's greatest invention. It was a communication network that linked every ship, every drone, every soldier, and every sensor in the fleet together in real time. There was no delay, no lag. When one ship saw something, every ship knew it instantly. When one drone found a weakness in the enemy's formation, every drone could exploit it at the same time. It turned the entire Terran military into a single, thinking organism, not unlike the Velhari hive mind, but faster, smarter, and far more flexible. Second, the intelligence. Humanity had spent 4 decades placing agents, analysts, and listening devices across the galaxy. They had mapped every Velhari fleet movement. They had recorded every battle. They had studied every tactic, every strategy, every strength, and every weakness. They knew how the Velhari hive mind worked, its frequencies, its protocols, its limitations. They knew things about the Velhari that the Velhari did not know about themselves. Third, the weapon. Wren pulled up a file marked with the highest possible security clearance. It was called Ghostlight. Ghostlight was not a bomb, it was not a beam. It was a signal, a carefully engineered electromagnetic pulse designed to interface directly with the Velhari hive mind communication frequency. But it did not simply jam the signal. Jamming could be overcome. Instead, Ghostlight fed false information directly into the hive network. Wrong orders, contradictory commands, phantom enemy contacts, panic signals from ships that did not exist. It would turn the Velhari's greatest strength, their perfect coordination, into their greatest weakness. The Velhari have never faced an enemy that attacked their minds before their ships, Ren said. They will not know how to respond, and by the time they figure it out, it will be too late. He laid out the battle plan. Operation Horizon Fall was not designed to win a battle. It was designed to win the entire war in a single stroke. Phase 1. Deploy Ghostlight across the Velhari communication network, crippling their coordination. Phase 2. Release the drone swarms, over 400,000 autonomous combat drones, to overwhelm the confused enemy fleets. Phase 3. A strike team of 60 ships called Task Force Sable would execute a precision jump deep into Velhari space and assault the command nexus, the central hub of the entire Velhari hive mind. If the nexus fell, the Velhari war machine would collapse. It was bold. It was insane. By any standard of galactic warfare, it should have been impossible. But humanity had spent 42 years making sure it was not. Later that day, Director Voss sent her response to the Galactic Council. It was short and it was clear. The Terran Confederacy accepts the Concordance's request for military assistance. However, we have one condition. We will not reinforce your defensive lines. We will not join your existing strategy. We will end this war, our way, on our terms. Stay out of our path. The Council received the message with a mixture of hope and confusion. Several delegates were offended by the tone. One called it arrogant. Another called it madness. Admiral Torvan read the message alone in his quarters and felt something he had not felt in years. He could not name it. It was small and fragile and buried under decades of loss. But it was there, beating faintly in his chest like a second heart. Hope. He thought the war had killed it. He was wrong. Across the galaxy, in hidden shipyards and secret bases, 1,200 human warships powered up their engines for the first time. Their crews, men and women who had trained in silence for years, took their stations. In the hangars, 400,000 drones ran their final system checks. In the armories, Marines loaded their weapons and sealed their armor. General Ren stood on the bridge of his flagship, the TCNS Inevitable. It was the largest warship humanity had ever built, a kilometer of dark metal and quiet power. He looked at the stars on the view screen and thought about what was coming. He thought about the weight of it, the lives that would be lost, the lives that would be saved. He opened a fleet-wide channel. Every human in the operation heard his voice. This is General Ren. In a few minutes, we will make the longest FTL jump in human history. When we arrive, we will face an enemy that has terrorized this galaxy for over 4 decades. They do not know we are coming. They do not know what we are capable of. By the time they learn, the war will be over. He paused. Humanity has been watching for 42 years. Now the galaxy will watch us. Let us make sure they remember what they see. He gave the order. 1,200 ships engaged their FTL drives at the same moment. Space bent, twisted, and screamed. And then they were gone, racing across the galaxy toward the heart of the enemy's empire at speeds that would have been called impossible just a century ago. The silence they left behind was total. And it was the last moment of peace the galaxy would know for the next 5 hours. The Velhari patrol fleet stationed in the Varath system was not expecting visitors. Varath was deep inside Dominion-controlled space, 300 light-years behind the front lines of the war. No enemy had reached this far in over 30 years. The system held 6 planets, 2 major shipyards, and a military garrison of 400 warships. It was, by any measure, one of the safest places in the Velhari Empire. At exactly 600 Galactic Standard Time, the sky above Vareth broke open. 1,200 human warships dropped out of FTL travel in a perfect formation that stretched across 2 million kilometers of space. They appeared all at once, like a curtain being pulled back to reveal an army that had been standing there in the dark, waiting. The Velhari Patrol Commander, a Hive-linked officer designated Warden Thess, received the sensor data and did not understand it at first. Her mind, connected to the local Hive network, processed the information in fractions of a second. 1,200 unknown vessels. No identification signals. No matching profiles in any Velhari database. They had appeared from nowhere deep inside protected territory, in numbers that should have been impossible. Before Warden Thess could send an alert to the wider HiveMind network, the humans made their first move. And it was not a weapon. The Ghostlight payload launched from the forward ships of the Terran fleet in the form of thousands of small, fast-moving probes. They were tiny, no bigger than a human fist, and they scattered in every direction like seeds thrown into the wind. Within seconds, they had spread across the entire system. Each probe carried a single piece of technology, a transmitter tuned to the exact frequency of the Velhari HiveMind. The Velhari HiveMind was the backbone of their entire civilization. Every Velhari was connected to it from the moment they were born. Through it, they shared thoughts, orders, emotions, and awareness. It made them fast. It made them coordinated. It made their fleets move as one. No species in the galaxy had ever found a way to disrupt it. Humanity had found a way to do something far worse. The Ghostlight transmitters did not jam the HiveMind. Jamming would have been obvious. The Velhari would have noticed the silence and adapted. Instead, Ghostlight spoke to the HiveMind in its own language. It injected false signals directly into the network. Ghost contacts phantom enemy fleets appearing on sensors where nothing existed. Contradictory orders from commanders who had never sent them. Distress calls from ships that were perfectly fine. Navigation data that was slightly, subtly wrong. The effect was immediate and devastating. Warden Thess felt it hit her mind like a wave of noise. Suddenly, her thoughts were not her own. She could hear 100 voices shouting different things. Enemy fleet approaching from the north, no. From the south, no. There was no enemy. Yes, there was retreat, advance, hold position, abandoned ship. She tried to focus. She tried to sort the real signals from the false ones. But the false signals were perfect. They sounded exactly like real HiveMind communication. There was no way to tell them apart. It was like trying to find one true voice in a room where 1,000 people were all speaking the same words in the same tone. Across the Vareth system, 400 Velhari warships descended into chaos. Ships that had been flying in perfect formation began to drift. Some turned toward phantom enemies that did not exist. Others received contradictory navigation orders and collided with each other. 2 destroyers, convinced that their own fleet had been infiltrated, opened fire on their allies. In 18 minutes, the Velhari garrison in the Vareth system went from a disciplined military force to a confused, fractured mess. And the humans had not fired a single shot. Now the second phase began. The carrier ships at the center of the Terran fleet opened their launch bays. What came out of them did not look like traditional fighters or bombers. They were drones, small, fast, angular machines about the size of a human car. Each one carried a set of lightweight weapons and a quantum mesh receiver that connected it to every other drone in the swarm. 400,000 of them poured out of the carriers in waves. To Admiral Torvan, watching the battle feed from a Concordance monitoring station hundreds of light-years away, it looked like the human ships were bleeding, releasing clouds of dark metal that spread across space like ink dropped into water. His sensor officers were struggling to track them all. There were simply too many. "What are those?" Torvan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Autonomous combat drones," his intelligence officer replied. The humans call them kestrels. Each one is controlled by an artificial intelligence linked to the Terran command network. They share information, coordinate attacks, and adapt their tactics in real time. Torvald watched the kestrels move. They did not fly in formations the way ships normally did. They flowed, shifting and reshaping like a living creature, like a flock of birds that could think. When a gap appeared in the Velhari formation, the drones rushed to fill it. When a Velhari ship raised its shields on one side, the drones attacked from the other. When a Velhari weapon locked onto a group of drones, they scattered and reformed somewhere else in an instant. The confused Velhari fleet, already blinded by ghostlight, was being taken apart piece by piece. The drones did not go for killing blows. They targeted engines, weapons, and communication arrays. They disabled ships rather than destroying them. It was precise. It was surgical. And it was happening so fast that the Velhari could not keep up. Torvald had fought in dozens of battles. He had seen species wage war in every way imaginable. He had never seen anything like this. "They are not fighting a war," he said slowly. "They are performing surgery." While the main fleet tore through the Verath system, a smaller group of ships separated from the formation and slipped away quietly into the darkness of space. Task Force Sable, 60 warships led by General Wren aboard the TCNS Inevitable. Their target was not here. Their target was the most important structure in the entire Velhari Empire, the Command Nexus. The Command Nexus was a massive space station located in the Velhari home system, deep in the heart of their territory. It was the central hub of the hive mind, the place where the highest-level signals were generated and broadcast to every Velhari in the galaxy. The hive matriarch herself resided there, the oldest and most powerful mind in the Dominion. As long as the Nexus stood, the Velhari could recover from any defeat. They could rebuild their networks, reorganize their fleets, and continue fighting. The Nexus was the brain. Everything else was just the body. No enemy had ever come close to the Nexus. It was defended by minefields, sensor arrays, and a permanent garrison fleet. The Velhari believed it was untouchable. General Wren intended to touch it. Task Force Sable engaged their FTL drives and vanished from the Verath system. Their jump was calculated to a level of precision that would have made most alien navigators faint. They would exit FTL inside the Velhari home system, within weapons range of the Nexus itself. There was almost no margin for error. A miscalculation of even a fraction of a percent could drop them inside a planet or a star. But humanity had spent 42 years calculating. Back at the monitoring station, Admiral Torvald received updated reports. The battle in the Verath system was entering its second hour. The Velhari garrison was in ruins. Over 200 enemy ships had been disabled. Human losses: 4 drones destroyed by lucky shots. 4 drones, not 4 ships. 4 drones out of 400,000. Torvald leaned back in his chair and stared at the display. Around him, his officers were silent. Some had tears in their eyes. They had spent their entire lives losing this war. They had watched friends die, worlds fall, and hope fade year after year. And now, in less than 2 hours, a species they had dismissed as too young and too small was doing what the entire Concordance could not do in 4 decades. A communication officer spoke up. "Admiral, we are receiving a transmission. It is on an open channel. It is coming from deep inside Velhari space." Torvald frowned. "Put it through." The voice that filled the room was calm, steady, and unmistakably human. "This is General Marcus Wren of the Terran Confederate Navy aboard the TCNS Inevitable. We have arrived at the Velhari Command Nexus. To any Velhari forces receiving this message, you have 5 hours. You just do not know it yet." The transmission ended. Torvald sat in the silence that followed, and for the first time in 26 years of war, he smiled. The Velhari were not weak, they were not stupid, and they were not going to die quietly. Deep in the outer reaches of Dominion space, far from the chaos of the Verath system, a Velhari fleet commander named Overmind Kale felt the hive mind begin to scream with false signals and knew, instantly, that something was terribly wrong. She was old for a Velhari, her carapace scarred from 100 battles, and she had survived this long by trusting her instincts above all else. She did something no Velhari was supposed to do. She cut herself off from the hive mind. The silence that followed was terrifying. For a Velhari, being disconnected from the hive was like losing all 5 senses at once. It was emptiness. It was loneliness in its purest form. But it also meant the false signals could not reach her. Her mind was her own. She activated local communication, short-range, ship-to-ship signals that bypassed the corrupted hive mind entirely. It was slow. It was crude. But it worked. "All commanders in range," she broadcast. "The hive mind has been compromised by an unknown enemy weapon. Sever your connections immediately. Switch to local swarm protocols. Rally to my position." Across several star systems, other Velhari commanders, the smartest and the toughest, heard her call and obeyed. One by one they cut their link to the hive and fell back on an older, more primitive form of coordination. Local swarm intelligence. It was how the Velhari had fought before they had built the Nexus, thousands of years ago. It was slower, less elegant, and far less efficient. But it worked. Within 90 minutes, Overmind Kale had assembled a counterfleet. Over 3,000 warships gathered from garrisons across 6 systems, all operating independently from the poisoned hive mind. They were angry, they were hurt, and they were coming. The 3rd hour of the battle had begun. General Wren received the intelligence update aboard the TCNS Inevitable as Task Force Sable held position near the command nexus. The Nexus garrison had been thrown into confusion by Ghostlight, and Sable's ships were picking apart the disorganized defenders with precision fire. But Wren was not focused on the battle in front of him. He was reading the data coming from the main fleet at Verath. 3,000 ships, his tactical officer reported. They have severed themselves from the hive mind and are converging on our main fleet at Verath. Estimated arrival, 22 minutes. Wren nodded slowly. He had expected this. The Velhari had dominated the galaxy for centuries. They had not done so by being fragile. Somewhere in their vast empire, there would be commanders smart enough to adapt. He had planned for it. "Relay to Fleet Admiral Chen at Verath," Wren said calmly. "Execute Anvil Protocol." Fleet Admiral Lin Chen stood on the bridge of the TCNS Horizon's Edge, the command ship of the main Terran fleet. She was a small woman with black hair tied in a tight knot and eyes that could freeze water. She had designed the Anvil Protocol herself, a defensive formation built specifically for the moment the Velhari recovered and fought back. "All ships form on the Anvil," she ordered. "Drone swarms to screening positions. Prepare for heavy contact." The Terran fleet shifted. The warships pulled into a tight, layered formation, heavy cruisers in front, carriers in the center, destroyers on the flanks. The Kestrel drones reformed into dense clouds around the fleet's edges, ready to intercept incoming fire and counterattack. The Velhari counterfleet arrived like a hammer. 3,000 ships dropped out of short-range FTL and opened fire immediately. They came in fast, aggressive, and without hesitation. These were not confused ships stumbling through corrupted orders. These were veteran warriors fighting on instinct and rage. Their weapons lit up the void in sheets of burning green energy. The first volley hit the Terran formation like a wall of light. The TCNS Bright Morning took a direct hit to its forward section and broke in two. The TCNS Steel Resolve lost its engines and began to drift. The TCNS Pale Horse detonated as a Velhari energy lance punched through its reactor core. 12 Terran ships were destroyed in the first 3 minutes. For the first time in the battle, humans died in large numbers. The Terran fleet shuddered under the assault. The Velhari pressed hard, pouring firepower into the formation, trying to crack it open. But the formation held. And then the quantum mesh did what it was built to do. Every impact on every Terran ship was recorded, analyzed, and shared across the entire fleet in real time. Shield frequencies were recalculated within seconds. The exact energy signature of every Velhari weapon was catalogued and countered. What had punched through a Terran shield 5 seconds ago now splashed harmlessly off an adjusted barrier. The Velhari fired the same weapons again. They did less damage. They adjusted their weapons. The humans adjusted their shields faster. Every exchange, every volley, every second of combat gave the quantum mesh more data. And with more data, the mesh became smarter. The fleet became harder to hurt. The Velhari were learning that they were fighting an enemy that got stronger the longer the battle lasted. Admiral Chen ordered the counterattack. The drone swarms launched forward, not in a single mass, but in hundreds of small, independent groups. Each group targeted a specific Velhari ship with a specific attack pattern calculated by the mesh in real time. They went for engines first, cutting off the Velhari ship's ability to maneuver. Then weapons arrays. Then sensors. Each target was disabled in a precise sequence, like a surgeon cutting nerves before removing a tumor. Velhari ships began to go dark, not destroyed, but blinded, crippled, and helpless. Hundreds of them. The swarms moved through the enemy fleet like water flowing through cracks in stone. There was no single point to strike back at, no command ship to target, no formation to break. There were only 100,000 small, fast, intelligent machines that worked together with a coordination that matched, and then surpassed, the Velhari's own. Overmind Kale, commanding the counterfleet from her flagship, felt something cold settle in her chest as she watched her ships die around her. Not die, something worse. They were being taken apart, carefully, deliberately, as if the enemy did not want to kill them but wanted to make sure they could never fight again. She had fought the Concordants for 30 years. They were brave but predictable. They fought with honor but without imagination. These humans were different. They fought the way water fights stone, formless, patient, unstoppable. While the main battle raged at Verath, Task Force Sable began its assault on the command nexus. The nexus was a massive structure, a sphere of dark metal and living tissue nearly 20 kilometers across, surrounded by rings of defensive platforms and docked warships. Even with its garrison in disarray from the Ghostlight attack, the station itself was heavily armored and defended by automated weapons systems that operated independently of the hive mind. General Wren did not try to destroy the Nexus. Destroying it would have killed millions of Velhari civilians who lived inside it, and it would have shattered the hive mind permanently, something that could have driven the entire Velhari species to madness. Wren did not want that. He wanted to win the war, not commit a genocide. Instead, he sent in the Marines. Breaching pods launched from the Sable warships, small, armored capsules carrying 10 soldiers each. They punched through the station's outer hull like needles through skin and delivered their passengers directly into the corridors of the Nexus. The Marines of the Terran Confederate Marine Corps were not ordinary soldiers. Each one wore a powered exoskeleton that tripled their strength and speed. Their armor could stop a Velhari plasma bolt at close range. Their helmets fed them real-time tactical data from the quantum mesh, enemy positions, structural layouts, optimal routes. They moved through the dark corridors of the Nexus like ghosts, clearing room after room with lethal efficiency. The Velhari guards inside the station fought fiercely. They were large, fast, and strong, with natural armor plating and razor-sharp limbs that could cut through metal. In close quarters, they were terrifying opponents. But the human Marines had something the Velhari did not fully understand: individual creativity. Every Marine thought independently. They improvised. They adapted on the fly. One squad used maintenance tunnels to flank a Velhari defensive position. Another rerouted the station's own atmosphere systems to fill a corridor with sleeping gas before moving in. A third squad tricked a group of Velhari guards by broadcasting false hive mind signals from a captured transmitter, drawing them into an ambush. The Velhari guards, even disconnected from the hive mind, still fought in patterns. They formed ranks. They held positions. They followed training. The Marines did not follow patterns. Every engagement was different. Every squad fought its own way, and the Velhari could not predict what came next. Hour by hour, room by room, the Marines pushed deeper into the Nexus. General Wren opened a direct communication channel to the deepest part of the station, the chamber of the Hive Matriarch. "This is General Wren of the Terran Confederacy," he said. "Your fleets are broken. Your Nexus is breached. I am offering you the chance to end this war with your species intact. Surrender now, and I give you my word humanity will ensure the survival of the Velhari people." The Matriarch's response was broadcast not through the corrupted hive mind, but through the station's internal speakers, so that every Marine and every Velhari guard could hear it. "The Velhari do not surrender," she said. Her voice was ancient and filled with a pride that had been forged over thousands of years. "We were old when the stars were young. We will not kneel to children." Wren closed his eyes for a moment. He had hoped she would accept. He respected her, he respected all of them. But he could not let respect stop him from ending 42 years of suffering. "Then I am sorry for what comes next," he said. The Marines reached the Nexus core, the central chamber where the hive mind signal was generated and broadcast to the galaxy. They did not destroy it. They connected a device to it, a final, massive ghost-like payload, loaded not with confusion and chaos but with a single, clear message. They activated it. Every Velhari in the galaxy, every soldier, every worker, every child heard the same words at the same time, spoken in their own hive language, carried through the very network that had connected them since birth. "The war is over. Lay down your arms. You will not be destroyed." The message repeated again and again. Across 100 star systems, Velhari soldiers stopped fighting. Weapons lowered. Ships went silent. The hive mind, for the first time in the history of their species, carried not an order from the matriarch, but a message from someone else. And slowly, painfully, the guns fell silent. The fifth hour was not a battle, it was a breath. Across the galaxy, something extraordinary was happening. Velhari warships that had been firing moments ago were now drifting with their weapons powered down. Soldiers who had been charging through corridors with blades raised were standing still, their arms at their sides, their compound eyes blinking in confusion. The message that had been injected into the hive mind was still repeating, calm, clear, and impossible to ignore. "The war is over. Lay down your arms. You will not be destroyed." Not every Velhari obeyed. In some systems, hardened commanders who had severed their hive mind connections refused to believe the message. Pockets of resistance continued to fight for hours, and some would hold out for days. But these were fragments of broken pieces of a machine that no longer had a center. The command nexus was in human hands. The hive mind carried a new voice. The war's spine had been snapped. It took exactly 5 hours and 11 minutes from the moment the Terran fleet dropped out of FTL in the Vareth system to the moment the Hive Matriarch formally surrendered. She did it aboard the TCNS Inevitable. General Wren stood in the ship's main conference room and watched as the Hive Matriarch was escorted in by 4 human Marines. She was enormous, nearly 3 meters tall, with a body covered in dark, iridescent armor plates that had been polished by centuries of wear. Her eyes, dozens of them, arranged in clusters across her angular head, moved constantly, taking in every detail of the room. She moved with a slow dignity that made even the armed Marines around her seem small. She was ancient, the oldest living Velhari, the mind at the center of the hive for over 400 years. She had started this war. She had commanded fleets that burned entire civilizations. And now she stood in the conference room of a species she had never considered worth noticing. Ren did not gloat. He did not smile. He stood at attention and waited until she was seated before he spoke. "Matriarch," he said, "I want you to know that the terms of this surrender are not punishment. Humanity did not come here to humiliate you or your people." The matriarch studied him with those countless eyes. When she spoke, her voice was low and resonant, translated through a device on the table into words Ren could understand. "Then why did you come?" "To end the dying," Ren said simply. The terms were laid out clearly. The Velhari Dominion would cease all military operations immediately. Their fleet would stand down and submit to disarmament under joint Terran Concordance supervision. In exchange, humanity guaranteed the territorial integrity of the Velhari homeworlds. There would be no occupation, no enslavement, no revenge. The Velhari people would be allowed to live, to rebuild, and to govern themselves under the condition that they never again waged aggressive war. The matriarch read the terms in silence. When she finished, she looked at Ren for a long time. "You could destroy us," she said. "Your weapons, your machines, your swarms, they could erase my species from the galaxy. I have seen what they can do. Why do you offer mercy?" Ren leaned forward slightly. "Because the ability to destroy is not strength. Anybody can burn a house down. Strength is choosing not to, especially when the house tried to burn yours first." The matriarch was silent for a long while. Then she pressed her claw against the document, the Velhari equivalent of a signature. The Crucible War was over. The final tally came in over the following days. The Terran Confederacy had lost 34 ships and 2,112 personnel. Every name was recorded. Every family was notified. General Ren read each name personally. The Velhari had lost over 800 warships, but the vast majority had been disabled, not destroyed. Fewer than 40,000 Velhari had died in the battle. For a galactic-scale conflict decided in 5 hours, the number was astonishingly low. The humans had not come to exterminate. They had come to end a war with as little blood as possible. When the numbers reached the Galactic Council, there was silence. Then there were tears. 42 years of war, a war that had killed billions, ended by a species that lost 2,000 people and chose to spare an enemy that would not have spared them. Admiral Torvan requested a meeting with General Ren. It was granted. They met on a neutral station, a small trading post on the edge of what had once been the front lines. Torvan arrived in his dress uniform, his metals polished, his posture straight despite the ache in his old bones. Ren arrived in simple gray fatigues without any medals at all. They sat across from each other at a small table in a quiet room. Two soldiers from opposite sides of a war that had defined both their lives. Torvan studied the human general. Ren was calm. His face showed no pride, no satisfaction, no arrogance. He looked like a man who had finished a difficult job and was thinking about the work still to come. "I have one question," Torvan said. "The galaxy has been asking it since the day you arrived, and I think I have earned the right to ask it to your face." Ren nodded. "Ask." "Why did you wait so long?" Ren was quiet for a moment. He looked down at his hands, hands that had signed the orders that sent thousands of soldiers into battle, hands that had guided the end of the longest war the galaxy had ever known. "Because we did not want to become another faction in an endless war," he said. "We saw what was happening. We watched the Concordance and the Velhari grind each other down for decades, throwing lives and ships into a fire that never got any smaller. If we had joined early, we would have become part of that fire. We would have won battles and lost battles, and the war would have dragged on for another 40 years. He paused. "Humanity does not fight wars it cannot end. We waited because we needed to be certain, absolutely certain, that when we acted we could stop the bleeding. Not just for your side, for everyone, including the Velhari." Torvan leaned back. "You spent 42 years preparing to save an enemy." "We spent 42 years preparing to save everyone," Ren corrected gently. Torvund closed his 4 eyes and let out a long, slow breath. My people spent those years cursing your name, calling you cowards, saying you did not care. I know, Ren said. That was the hardest part, not the preparing, not the fighting. Listening to people suffer and knowing that if we moved too soon we would only make it worse. That was the hardest part. They sat together in silence for a while. It was not an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two men who understood each other. The Galactic Council convened 1 month later. The chamber was fuller than it had been in years. Species that had fled were returning. Seats that had been empty for decades were occupied again. The air hummed with a fragile, uncertain hope. Prelate Drassen, looking somehow both older and more alive than before, stood at the center of the chamber and made the announcement that everyone had been expecting. The Council formally offers the Terran Confederacy full senior membership, with a permanent seat on the High Council and all rights and privileges that come with it. In recognition of their role in ending the Crucible War, humanity is granted priority status in all future galactic deliberations. It was the highest honor the Council could give. It was the thing that humanity had been denied for 80 years. It was, in many ways, an apology. Director Alara Voss stood to respond. She wore a simple dark suit. Her silver hair caught the light. Every eye in the chamber, hundreds of alien species, watched her. The Terran Confederacy is honored by this offer, she said. We accept membership in the Galactic Council, a standard seat, equal to any other species. She paused to let the murmurs settle. We declined senior status. We declined priority standing. We did not end this war to place ourselves above anyone. We ended it because it needed ending. She looked around the chamber slowly, meeting the eyes of every delegate she could. We are not here to rule. We are here to make sure this does not happen again. She sat down. The silence that followed was filled not with shock but with something deeper, a respect that had been earned in blood and mercy. 6 months passed. The galaxy healed slowly, the way all wounded things heal, unevenly, painfully, but steadily. On a world called Tessara Prime, which had been one of the first planets to fall to the Velhari at the start of the war, reconstruction was underway. Velhari workers and Concordance engineers worked side by side, rebuilding cities that had been ruins for decades. Human mediators moved between the groups, solving disputes, coordinating resources, translating not just languages but cultures. It was not easy. 42 years of hate did not vanish in a day. There were arguments. There were fights. There were moments when it seemed like the old wounds would never close. But every day the work continued. Every day something new was built where something old had been destroyed. Admiral Torvund, now retired, had chosen to spend his remaining years on Tessara Prime. He sat on the balcony of a small house overlooking the reconstruction zone, watching a Velhari crane operator and a Sithal architect argue about the placement of a bridge support. A human mediator stepped between them, said something that made both of them pause, and then, to Torvund's amazement, made both of them laugh. He shook his head and smiled. Then he turned to the recording device on the table beside him. He had been writing his memoirs, the story of the Crucible War as he had lived it. He had reached the final chapter. He pressed the record button and spoke. I have lived a long life, and most of it was spent at war. I watched civilizations fall. I watched good people die for causes that stopped making sense long before the fighting stopped. I spent 42 years believing that the war would be my entire story, that I would die in it, and the galaxy would still be burning when I was gone. He paused and looked out at the city being reborn below him. And then the humans came. They came late. They came quiet. And they ended it in 5 hours. Not because they were stronger than everyone else, though they were. Not because their weapons were better, though they were. They ended it because they were the only ones who had the patience to wait until they could do it right, and the mercy to spare an enemy that did not expect to be spared. He watched the sun set over the new buildings, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. We spent 42 years wondering why they would not fight. We should have spent that time wondering what would happen when they did. He turned off the recorder and sat in the quiet evening, watching the world rebuild itself, one stone at a time.